welcome to the Monday, February 6th meeting of the 2012 meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission. This is a meeting that was rescheduled from the 23rd? Yep. 23rd of January. That was an ice storm rescheduling, so a quick review of the agenda. Pretty much the two things we're going to talk about tonight are the energy chapter of the town plan and land use chapter of the town plan. The energy chapter discussion is the second reading, whatever we call
More
it.
than that.
Second,
I think it was version 5.0.
Yeah. 2+ anyway. And then the land use chapter, we have had part of that we've discussed already, and parts of that we've discussed already, and this is the, whatever it is, of the second part of it. So we're a ways along the way. First order of business is to approve the minutes of January 9th, 2011, which is our actual...
No, I think...
Yeah, January 9th.
But 2012.
Oh, 12, sorry. Yeah, I got the wrong year here. But January 9th, 2012, which seems like a long time ago, but that was our last meeting. Is there a motion to accept those minutes?
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Gary.
Is that the minutes? No.
That's, yeah.
I didn't bring them, so I can't comment.
Well, you can, if you can remember something about them that you want to comment on. Are there any comments, any discussion? So my only discussion, or my only comment is, when I pointed out a phrase on page 4 of the housing chapter, what I was objecting, or what I thought was objectionable, was female householders with no husband present, not just female householders. It was the no husband present that I thought.
Oh, we had you down for a complete misogynist? All right.
Yeah, I just thought.
Well, let the record show that you're enlightened.
Well, whatever. I just figured if there's two women that are partners, there is no husband present, but they might find that objectionable, and that's the basis of my objection. So let the record
fix
show. Yeah. All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the minutes have been accepted. Announcements. All my announcements from last meeting have already happened already. So,
Mine too.
anybody have any announcements? Joe, you must have some announcements down there. Nothing?
I just gave them all out on the news program.
I get one announcement I would have is, and this is just a general comment, that there will be plenty of candidate events and so forth coming up, so that people can hear what what people that are running for different offices in town have to say, and discussions and whatnot. And
What's election day?
Election day is March
6th.
6th.
My father's birthday. Election day is on my father's birthday.
4 weeks from today.
That's very useful information.
From tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, tomorrow. Right.
Yeah.
Close enough.
And so that's the only announcement I can think of. Any announcements from the Office of Planning?
I have an announcement. On February 16th from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. at Vermont Technical College in Randolph, there is a regional broadband planning initiative to assemble toolkits for your regional plan. Sounds interesting, doesn't it?
On February 16th?
Actually,
Will you share that? Email?
I can forward it to you guys.
we'd love to have that announcement.
Join community leaders from around the state to share ideas and learn how online tools are being used to create jobs, reinvent schools, attract visitors, improve civic involvement, and enliven Vermont communities. The workshop is sponsored by the Vermont Community Broadband Project
Where is that?
in Randolph,
You
Vermont.
drink?
I'm actually going.
Okay.
If anybody wants to carpool.
You can represent us.
So it's regional, what is it called, the Regional Broadband?
Regional Broadband Planning Initiative.
Is
I
that
can-
Vermont League of Cities and Towns?
No.
And
Nope.
is it through them? No.
No.
Nope.
Did anybody by any chance go to the Dummerston Conservation Commission last Thursday? They did a river program.
I'll forward this.
Yeah, that'd be good.
In pantomime?
I think we've had it actually. I think I can't. It's familiar.
One of the people from A&R was there to do a presentation
Okay,
about it.
thanks.
That was nice.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Maybe
Okay.
I saw it on
And it
one
was-
of
Moved from a
Okay.
weather night previously.
If there are no other announcements, we'll go on to other business. Any other business? If there's no other business, we'll go on to public comment. We have a member of the public here, allegedly. And Paul, if you have anything to say about anything that we're not already scheduled to talk about, this is a great time to do that. Otherwise, your time is coming in moments. Okay. All right. So then the next part of our meeting is to discuss the energy chapter. And I don't know, Rod, were you going to take the lead on this one?
Sure. Thank you. So you should all have a copy of the latest version. Actually, it is 5.0 in your packets. And I'm not sure how you want to approach it. I'm happy to sort of summarize where we got to. There's a sort of a long gestation period with this chapter, longer than all the others, I think.
Want to
So-
give us a sort of a round by round, a little
Like
bit?
an elephant?
Or which things are the new things and different things?
So, to remind people of where we were at, the last time we had looked at this, we were incorporating comments from a small group made up of planning commissioners and energy committee members and Paul. And then the last time it was presented here was in the late fall, maybe even been winter, December, where further comments were provided by the energy committee to an outline version. And we had, at that point, more or less solidified goals, policies, and actions, including action steps. But there was some issues about how to effectively represent things around the scale of renewable energy and so forth. And also at that point, the state comprehensive energy plan was draft, and it's now been adopted by or approved by the state. And they're very excited about it. And so we were incorporating some of the information from that. The other thing that happened was that between the time we first started writing this chapter and this version, we actually changed the format or the template for all chapters. And so this now incorporates the latest formatting of chapters, which is a little different, organized a little differently from before. So to take you through it fairly quickly and then get onto your comments, the introduction just lays out pretty much where communities such as Brattleboro get most of their energy from, what the relationship between fossil fuel use is and land use and economic activity is. Introduces the reader to the energy element contained in Chapter 117, which this chapter is required to respond to, and then works through where we get the data from, making note of the fact that there's very little local data available. Then we move on to current conditions, which is a quick summary of the long and proud history that Brattleboro has when it comes to matters of addressing global climate change and energy use. Then we break out into describing energy use, and here the kind of the regulatory purview of state agencies, and then by implication what's left for Brattleboro becomes a little clearer. So when it boils down to it, the State Public Service Board really regulates electricity the most directly and the most strongly, and in particular the two electricity utilities that have regional monopolies. So that's Green Mountain Power and Central Vermont Public Service, and they themselves are about to merge. So we depend there on key statewide findings as a way of describing the current patterns of energy use. The key point being made that just over 50% of our energy by source is derived from petroleum products. Most of that is associated with transportation and fuel oil for heating purposes. So then we move quickly through there to look at changes in energy consumption for Vermont over time. And there's a direct correlation between the level of economic activity and energy use. Then we go a little closer in scale and we look at Brattleboro's electricity use. And from there we shift even tighter and start talking about public facilities in Brattleboro, primarily those municipal facilities and school structures. Then we turn to the topic of energy sources. And again, there's a substantial amount of information on electric power, less on others. Then we look at renewable energy, and again, we start off at sort of the state level, but try and describe in as much detail as possible the contributions to renewable energy that have been undertaken in Brattleboro already, and the potential for more in the future. Then we look at shifts in the delivery of renewable energy, in particular biomass and solar power, assuming that they are the most appropriate or the most likely forms of renewable energy that will be deployed in Brattleboro in the near to medium future. Then we importantly make note of what concerns the community may have around the siting of renewable energy facilities, including but not limited to unintended glare from solar panel arrays.
Where is that, Red?
The bottom of page 8, citing renewable energy and local impacts, and then runs on to page 9. And as far as I can tell, because it's very sunny, Colorado is at the forefront of attempting to regulate the unintended consequences of glare from solar panels at the county level in parts of Colorado. I don't know of any language that exists currently.
What would that look like? That sort of regulation? What would that
It's a
be?
nuisance. It's covered under a nuisance so.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
We also make note of the possibility, given the presence of temperature inversions, that if there were larger scale wood chip processing or pellet production or biomass combined heat and power facilities along the Connecticut, that there are issues to do with temperature inversions that could trap the the particulates and the smoke generated by such facilities. Then lastly, we sort of flip to the other side of the coin and identify the need to think about the possibility of land development, shading or shadowing abutters, and thus reducing their ability to deploy solar power. So then we move on to energy conservation and efficiency, and the important section here is actually the discussion to do with energy intensity, and there's a brief discussion there around that item. And becomes clear again that due to Vermont's rural nature and the preponderance of single occupant motor vehicles related to employment and education and other activities, that we have significantly lower energy intensity than our neighboring New England states. And that would be a key measure of our performance if we were to improve energy intensity. And this is actually fairly old research that's been validated since the late 1970s. And there's no necessary relationship between the wealth of a community or a state or a nation and energy intensity. So in other words, there are many examples of fairly wealthy countries with high standards of living that also have high levels of energy intensity. There is some concern on the part of the Comprehensive Energy Plan addressing energy intensity. There's a small discussion there about energy intensity, and you could view at the local level the long-term efforts of the Energy Committee and Energy Coordinator around efficiency and conservation as ways of improving energy intensity. That's discussed. And then we move on to energy and transportation, which in some ways is the most difficult to address for a number of reasons, none least of which is this is not an area of economic or social activity that the state has any real direct influence over, apart from indirect things such as providing the road network or other forms of transportation technology. And by implication, Brattleboro has even less influence over those things. Most of the decision-making behind transportation is at an individual consumer level. And we then go on to discuss the possibility of complete streets contributing to more bicycle and pedestrian use if the road conditions improve for those users, and park and ride lots, and in a very small way updating the existing plug-in station in the parking garage so that contemporary plug-in electric vehicles could be charged in the parking garage. And then lastly, we turn to the question of energy and land use, which again comes up in the Comprehensive Energy Plan, despite the fact that the Public Service Board has no direct ability to control land use in Vermont. It's outside their statutory authority, but it doesn't stop them talking about it. There's a brief discussion of the role that land use plays in energy use. That's it.
Okay.
So I'm happy to take comments or answer questions as best we can.
Who would like to start?
I have a couple.
Okay.
Thank you, Rod. So this was very nice. It's fun seeing it evolve.
Yeah, it's a bit like a member of family now.
Yeah. I'm just a little struck by the fact that, if you read the Brattleboro Reformer every day,
You do? Oh, even Friday?
especially Friday,
Standing ovation.
there's nothing about Vermont Yankee in here, except for this little chart that talks about CVPS
Yep.
energy fuel use.
We were pursuing the very subtle line pursued by the Comprehensive Energy Plan, which is to pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, I think it should be mentioned that it does exist, and kind of whether, whether it's controversial or not, it does exist. It's right down the road. We are within the range of its emergency
Yep.
management measures.
Right. I think so we do mention it. It comes up in that beautiful graphic, all the dark gray area at the bottom.
Yes, it's
Nuclear.
nicely shaded from
Yes.
view.
I thought that was a good color choice. And I think it's glowing orange, actually, in color.
Appropriate. Probably
Yeah.
Add in a paragraph there.
Yeah. So you want to see...
I wanted to
You want to see it under electric power? Or is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, 'cause it's the
Yeah,
source of-
It's
I
a
would
source.
think so. That,
Right.
you know, just stating that it
Yep.
exists and
We're not going to be buying any power from it.
it's, you know, I think we're in a weird little limbo about that
Right.
it exists and we're not going to gain
And
any
this
power
section was
from it.
completed just prior to Murtha's earth-shattering decision.
So,
So,
but just, you know.
yep.
And also, I thought it would be nice if there was something about the sustainability forum that we had in the town, and
Oh, yeah.
maybe something similar to actually what Paul had to say at that meeting, and perhaps involve the goals of the Energy Committee in with that, so that it's clear in this section what the goals of the Energy Committee are. I mean, we've given them a lot of assignments under the policies and action, but a little paragraph about what their mission is might be
Okay.
helpful,
And-
especially with regard to the fact that there was such a meeting and it found X, Y, and Z.
Do you have a suggestion as to where in the text you'd like to see that happen?
No, but I'll think about that.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, okay, thank you. That's good.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
Thank you. There may be, and we do have quite a few energy related organizations in town, you know. I mean, I don't know if it would make any sense to do any kind of an inventory like we do with some other things.
Oh, like the arts and culture chapter?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe not.
I mean, okay.
Well, we have the Energy Committee for one thing.
And BTU.
With you, you know, I guess a lot of them are businesses. That's not the right thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we don't.
Unless you wanted to mention the energy-related businesses.
But, I mean, we used to have a Solar Energy Association. I'm probably just living in the past, but, yeah, I don't know. I have to think about that. If there are really.
Is NESEA, N-E-S-E-A, still active in this community?
They're in Greenfield.
Yeah, but do they still, like, do people still, like, from here engage with them?
People belong to NESI.
Right. Okay. Right.
And Co-op Power is, you know, has a Southern Vermont, a Wyndham County group. What is it called? Chapter, I guess, of
Okay.
Co-op Power.
Yeah.
Probably 20 to 25 members, something like that.
Okay, so, good. So there is sort of enough then.
And I wondered about saying something about the energy portion of the Wyndham Regional. I don't know if it is it.
The Energy Committee of the Wyndham Regional Commission?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, they've been pretty focused on BY issues, and they'll continue
Oh,
to
have
be.
they?
I think they've expanded.
They've expanded some. And
Yeah.
I think that chapter in the upcoming revision of their plan will be approached pretty differently.
Well, I'm just, you know, the thing I think about with it is if and there are an awful lot of people who are concerned about energy in this town, particularly alternative energy, and
Right.
It might be interesting to have a list of groups of people that are active. But,
Okay, so as an appendix, similar to...
perhaps,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I think it's a good way of demonstrating the widespread nature of the interest and involvement, so that's good.
Yeah, because it's pretty big in this town,
Yeah.
for the most
Yep.
part.
Yep. Okay.
So anything else? Carolina? What do you got?
No, I wanted to be sure that I found it, the methane generation at Wyndham Solid Waste, but it's here, it's on page 7.
Uh-huh.
Turns out that we're the only one that's doing that right now. According
Only
to
one in the
today's
state?
reformer,
Yeah.
which is a hugely useful, up-to-date resource.
Do we have any farms in the area using their methane from their manure to like repower other stuff?
Not intentionally. There's one in
Westminster.
there's one in Westminster
Yeah.
that's intentional, but yeah, that's the only one I know of.
I thought of a spot to put that
Oh,
section
good.
I was talking about.
Okay.
At the end of the introduction, on the top of page 4, before current conditions.
Oh, okay. Good. Thank you. And you were talking about the goals of the Energy Committee there,
Yes, but also
and then a
a
report
mention
out
of
on the sustainability
of the
meeting.
sustainability meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
And I thought that the presentation that Paul gave at that meeting would kind of serve
Do that.
both purposes.
Yeah, you
Okay.
asked about that last time, too.
At least I'm consistent.
Yes.
Like a DVD of that, isn't it? Is that- re-record that.
Under policies and actions, 1.3 under actions, says report annually on progress towards energy reduction goals and so forth. To whom would that be, or do we even want to say?
Well, you know, the sort of obvious answer would be that the Energy Committee could choose to make an annual report to the Select Board. The Select Board appoints the Energy Committee.
Uh-huh.
Alternatively,
Yeah.
it could be a description of their work that would occur in the town report
Yeah.
to town meeting members.
No.
But, so that would be the obvious two vehicles, but
Also, the planning commission, in that planning commission's responsible for the town plan
yeah, we
to
could
some
ask
extent, so
ask them on an annual basis and get the answer.
Uh-huh.
see where we're on
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah, because we have an
Okay.
obligation.
I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really important to have to say who we think that would be to, even if it changes,
Yep.
because the goals are, you know, clear in terms of they have numbers, and
Yep.
you know, the actions about the baseline inventory and so forth. I think that's probably going to be a pretty rigorous list of stuff, you know?
So I think it makes the most sense to report to here,
Yeah.
right? Because we will also be wanting to monitor how well we're doing with these things.
I don't think it would hurt to have them have that copy sent to the select board with the town manager,
Right.
since it's appointed by them.
Sure. I
And,
mean,
and even Paul's position comes to town meeting rep in the line item in the budget, so it could be both.
I could imagine that being something that, as the years go by, that the papers would have, you know, would make note of. I really think it's going to be something that people are going to be concerned about more and more.
yeah,
So,
I agree. I think it's a performance measure that we should be, you know,
yeah.
watching. Okay, thank you.
I just want to point out that 2030 is 18 years away. That seems like our big
Not 50,
benchmark
like
here.
I like to keep thinking,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Joe?
I have a question about under policies and actions, number 2, assist energy consumers to take advantage of incentive programs for energy conservation and efficiency. Somewhere else in this document, you noted that the implementation of the hot water solar systems, because of increased awareness of those programs, caused a 400% increase in the installation of those.
Not solar hot water, they were just straight PV panels.
Just PV, so for electric even.
Yep.
I know that Paul in the past has done seems to have done ongoing seminars or programs or workshops or whatever to continue to teach people about that stuff. Is that what you're referring to in 2.1 where it says organized participation in programs, or are the state programs the programs you're referring to? And if so, I'm wondering if if it would be appropriate to include in the plan wording that more or less promotes or endorses or supports those ongoing workshops that he's had on a regular basis. I mean, I'm sure most of us, if not all of us in here, have attended one of them at one time or another. And whether it's him showing about the solar grants, it seems like the grant and funding arena on this stuff is still a fairly complicated place for people who are not familiar with that stuff. And the more that he does and can do to help people understand that maze of stuff.
Well, I think that was the virtue behind the Solarized Portland project, which is the one I singled out that had the 400% increase. So it started off as sort of a bulk buying opportunity at the behest of a single individual woman who couldn't afford the then market rate for solar panels and didn't have enough technical expertise and to be confident about how to proceed and who to trust. So through a neighborhood organization, they organized first a bulk purchase and then
Panels.
panels, and then identified with some assistance who would be reliable installers and how to figure out how to do it. So that even if you didn't have very much technical ability, but you still wanted to do it, then you could participate, and it was a matter of paying. So it went from over $7,000 for a 3 kilowatt hour system to down around 3,000. So then a lot of people bought in because it was a lot cheaper, and then that kept on rolling. And then the city of Portland picked up on that, and that's how it went to citywide. It led to a dramatic increase in that. So it's I guess why I'm explaining it now in this way is to actually say it's an illustration of, on a larger scale, of some of the sort of things that Paul's done, which is explain, support, show how the incentive programs work, where to go to get them.
And continue to make the citizens aware of what's currently available on that ever-changing landscape.
Yeah, and it's difficult to keep a track of just even the range of state and federal incentive packages, or even...
Right, it seems like a lot of them, some of them at least, are tied to time expirations at one.
Sure. So...
You could put that in the same spot we put the
Yeah.
other things
Yeah.
about Paul.
Yep.
So Joe, do you think that Action 2.1 is not clear enough, or
Well,
is it?
I wasn't sure exactly what you're referring to when you said programs. Were you meaning state programs or programs that we carry out to help people gain access to those services or funding mechanisms?
So I think it was, in my mind at least, it was left general because it could be
Either?
local, state, or federal.
At any level?
Or even private or philanthropic trust based. So
Right.
there's just such a variety of organizations that are involved in it that I guess I just left it.
So as vague as it is, that broadness covers, you feel that covers what he does? Or umbrellas out over the types of things that he promotes on a regular basis?
How about asking Paul?
Yeah.
Do you,
We
Paul?
can allow him to talk.
Oh,
about
okay.
it, but I think he actually wrote this one.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, just for our home viewing audience, would you please stand up to the microphone and say who you are?
And do you remember ever saying that,
so
Paul?
forth?
Plausible
How
deniability.
about in 2.1 we say organized participation approach to increase energy efficiency and renewables in commercial buildings, and then that would cover
Yep.
the workshops.
Yep.
Like you were talking about.
Yep.
Would that work?
Yep.
There's,
Thanks, Paul.
Is it time for the public to speak?
I just have a comment, I don't know where it would go, but in that place, most people who come to these kind of things tend to be homeowners, and there's many things that renters can do that aren't really expensive. And so I want to be sure that maybe it's just for homeowners and rent, maybe it's just an increase,
Yeah.
the awareness that we do awareness stuff for renters also,
Bless you. Yep.
or
okay.
renters and landlords.
Bless you.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know whether that would be
So are these?
just a
We could
clarification.
just say in residential and commercial buildings,
Yeah, we don't have to say property owners, we can just say residential and
Yeah.
commercial
rather
buildings.
than homes, which
Right.
maybe connotates
Kind
single
of, yeah,
family.
yeah, exactly.
So are all these incentives going to exist in 5 years from now?
No, I'd say there'll be all sorts of different incentives. I mean,
Yeah.
it just sort of mutates, and there are some that are longish lasting, but I also, I think it's fair to assume that as things get more urgent, there'll be more programs, and they'll be called different things, and they'll work in different ways. So, I guess I expect the landscape to fill up, as Joe referred to it as the landscape to sort of fill up and get more complicated, not get emptier.
So I do feel like to take advantage of incentive programs, I feel like it's more than just taking advantage of incentives. There has to be the awareness component first. People have to understand that to even go out there and look for the information, it has to be put in front of their face. I mean, if they're paying all this money for heating their homes, then if they understand that, look, instead of putting money into heating your home, PACE financing, in 5 years, you're going to have that money in your pocket.
I think
rather
most
than-
people are, particularly if you're using fuel oil or propane, most people are pretty acutely aware of where they're sending their money. But when they
But they don't know how to.
when they look at the alternatives, they can't find the upfront cash to do it. And so one of the things that's really been intriguing about the very rapid increase in solar panels in and around Brattleboro, even in the last year, it's really strongly associated with changes in the net metering contracts. So now it's in your interest to slightly oversize the system. In other words, generate more power than you use to maintain a credit, because that credit will carry forward as long as you're at that place with the name on your bill. Whereas before it used to go to zero every December. So they were getting you on the hook. Yeah, they were getting you on the hook exactly in winter, when your ability to generate solar power was the lowest and your demand for electricity was the highest. So just that one shift, and then the constant decrease in price of solar panels. So now your payback period, instead of somewhere being like 10 years, all of a sudden it's 3.5 to 5.5 years, and at that point people are like, oh, I can handle that. But because they've got other things stacked up in terms of their budgets, how many years am I going to be paying off my own college tuition bills? How much am I going to, how long am I going to be paying for my children's? They've got all these other things, so they know quite well what they need to do or what they can do. They're very clear about the barrier being upfront cost.
So one thing that there's a common theme in the energy chapter that I'm noticing is that it seems like Brattleboro, or maybe even Vermont in general, they want to stay or be as self-reliant as possible. And it's the more self-reliant you are, the more inefficient you become, in a sense. If we're talking about a solar panel in every house, why not just cluster it and put it in, so it's like, when I just don't want to turn around in 20 years from now and say, and look at a solar panel, this is not a good, it's not really a good comparison, but the way people looked at cars being, in the 50s, are we going to look at solar panels in 30 years and we have to throw them away and get a new one, or there's a better system out there, and what are we going to do with them? Put them in a landfill?
I think it's very likely that they will be outdated
Yeah.
in 30 years.
So,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
to
But
put
they're
that
serving the purpose that they were put to
right.
now.
So to put that in context, a current solar panel is ridiculously more efficient and cheaper to produce than one that was made 30 years ago.
Right.
Just the same way as when you first used satellite television, the satellite dish was bigger than the whiteboard behind you and was referred to as the State Flower of Vermont, and now they're this big. So I don't know from a technological standpoint if you can ever really eliminate that or hope to set that aside. And there may be a different system of collection and distribution completely. And what I'd say from reading a lot about this through the Comprehensive Energy Plan and other sources is that they're pretty clear that the distributed energy aspect sets up, which is everyone having solar panels on their roof. So they're feeding energy in as much as they're drawing energy out. Right now, the grid is really designed to have a handful of locations where the power is generated and push it from there out over a huge grid. And it's not really designed to actually have a sprinkling of generators all over it and then to distribute the same power all over the place. That's actually a real challenge. And there's lots of really complicated technical discussions as to exactly why that's a challenge. But at the kind of regional level or in the town-wide level, I think at this point in our evolution, and it is some kind of an evolution, the most effective way we can think about doing this is for individuals to make decisions that they're going to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels and maybe nuclear generated electricity. And so to do that, they're going to adopt renewable generation strategies at a level that they can handle, which is solar panels on the roof or in the yard. If we were in a different part of the country or even a different part of the state, we might be beset with really complicated discussions looking at the environmental impact of a large-scale industrial scale wind farm or something similar that was going to produce renewable energy but would have measurable and obvious environmental impacts, for instance. And for a whole host of fairly lucky reasons, Brattleboro is not likely to confront that. So under those circumstances, we've become much more self-sufficient because we'd be a much bigger generator of renewable energy, but we'd also have to go through that fairly difficult dialogue as a community as to whether we thought that was appropriate or done the right way.
Because we have to deal with that now rather than in 30 years from now. And I feel like we need to put there. It's just, I don't know. There's something missing here that I feel like that we're not addressing. It just doesn't really, encouraging renewable energy, okay, but then, at what point do we say, let's really, really try to encourage. If you're going to do some kind of a subdivision, if you're going to build houses, then you have to do 50 solar panels on it or whatever,
Well, we can't.
I realize that.
Right. We can't regulate that as much as we'd love to, and it would be easy if we could. We don't have that ability because they're going to go to the Public Service Board to get their permit, the certificate of public good. We do have language in the back of this chapter talking about land use, and actually, if you want to have a look at that, you might want to strengthen that or something. So it says, first of all, keep Brattleboro compact. But through more intense redevelopment of the core, and then an orderly build-out of areas that are already serviced by existing town roads, public transit, and water and sewer systems. And then once that's done, new large-scale areas of residential development are deemed necessary. They should be appropriately planned as compact neighborhoods, so meeting the same standards that we've just set up for the compact core. And that the build-out mitigates the energy impact of development. And I think we can write language like that in the subdivision and zoning ordinance, which gets very close to saying we require you to use renewable energy, but we know that we can't make them do that. So what I'd say there is if, for example, if you were going to have a 50 unit subdivision on Upper Dummerston Road, 2 miles beyond, just short of the Dummerston border. So it's some distance from the core of town. You might set it up as an expectation that whoever's responsible for that subdivision is going to mitigate the reduction in energy intensity of people living there, driving up and down and whatever, by designing the subdivision to actually be in, net zero or close because you've assigned a certain amount of land for solar panels or something like that, right? So there's ways in which you could do it, and I think that's as close as we can take it in terms of the language.
In general, our land use language I mean, there's an awful lot you can do that doesn't sound like energy efficiency stuff that is, I mean, we're talking about trying to more densely develop the middle of town, the parts of town that are already developed, try to more densely develop them. And so that cuts down on transportation energy use,
Yep.
it cuts
Exactly.
down on new building energy use.
Right, the
all
embodied
embedded
energy and structure.
that's in all this stuff,
Right.
So, I mean,
Yeah, smart growth is energy efficient,
yeah.
Right.
as are the weatherization programs.
Yeah,
Talking
so
about
it's much
also.
more than collectors and stuff. I mean, I think of collectors as a really cool thing that is, that does something that people can see and touch and understand, but the other stuff isn't quite as
It's not as groovy, but it's
exciting.
important.
But it's probably going to have a greater effect net,
Right.
But people do what they can do.
But if you do both, then that's a major contribution. And so, to get back to your point about being self-sufficient or self-reliant or whatever, I think that there's a strong thread of that kind of conversation going on right now, and I'm not entirely convinced by it on all sorts of levels. What I'd say, though, is if the state really is trying to figure out how wherever human activity is, that more people are taking more responsibility for generating their own electricity and using it as efficiently as they can, then our dependence on fossil fuels and faraway sources of energy has to reduce. And so I don't think there's much merit or it's particularly important that Brattleboro pursue local energy first and foremost. But if you start thinking about it as a sort of a grid system with the entire state, with each community contributing whatever they can, then taken together, it's going to reduce our demand for big base load supplies from places like Hydro-Quebec, as well as the fluctuating load that you need to pull from a natural gas-fired power station in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, which is how we get it now. So everything's okay on the base load when it's a normal day, not too hot, not too cold, just right, which never really happens. But if it's too hot, then we need more electricity and we buy it on the spot market where it's priced at every second. And if it's too cold, we buy it on the spot market when it's priced at every second. And that price fluctuates depending on, the demand for the same commodity in Boston or Rhode Island as what we're, so we have to enter that market, and that's who we're competing with. So I think when the state level policy planners here are saying, look, if we can reduce the fluctuating demand as well as the base load demand by not a very large amount, say 20%, then in other words, if we're self-sufficient, an extra 20% as a state, that's a significant contribution. Anyway.
But it's also the case, too, that, we can't make anybody do anything. I mean, we don't even have building inspectors, so,
Right.
what the energy section of the master plan can do is definitely just encouraging certain specific things. We
Right.
can't make anybody do
Which
it.
is why I looked at the language around mitigation for new subdivisions and for new development. So,
It's in that last paragraph.
right,
I think-
and I'm clear
Does
there
that
even
work
that
for you,
it's not
Kimberly?
just
I don't know.
residential energy use that I'm referring to there. And
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean it about any new subdivision, any new land development on the scale of a subdivision. We could move towards that, I think, as a goal.
Okay. So,
I have
may
one
I
question.
call on a member of the public who had his hand up for a while?
Sure.
Go.
I just have a quick thing, but
Thanks. Chris Chapman, on the select board, also live not far from the neighborhood you were just describing. Remember when it went in?
Yep.
Controversial at the time.
Yep.
I wanted to comment just on the matter of report 1.3 of the policies and action report annually on progress toward energy reduction goals. I would like to suggest that reporting be to the select board. Yes, fine, bring it to the Planning Commission. I do think that it's such an important document, covering such an important subject, that it should go to be reported on where it's likely to get the most attention in the community. It seems to me that it's a subject that heats up from light. Exposed to the light, it glows. And that's what it needs to do. If we don't have it in the forefront of public awareness, we're not going to make progress on it. If you'll recall, the Energy Committee has been to the Select Board many times
Yes.
on the development of the PACE program. The PACE program is very promising. There are some final issues to be clarified and worked out, and then we'll be off and running with something that's going to greatly benefit not only energy use, conservation, energy intensity in the community, but it's going to probably promote more jobfulness, build out the green industry that we've heard about. So, with all due respect, I do believe that the Energy Committee should be making regular, although I don't know what periodicity there should be, I don't know how frequently, but they should be coming with a report to the Select Board periodically.
Let me ask you this, Chris. At the Charter Commission deliberations, or the town meeting for the charter adoption,
How could I forget?
right? I don't think anybody that was there will ever forget it.
I've forgotten them all.
But anyway, I think in the end, included in the charter was that that somebody report to somebody annually about progress towards the goals of the town plan.
In total, yeah.
Yeah, but we don't know who and to whom, or do we? I can't remember how it all shook out.
I don't recall either.
I've obliterated those details, but I'm sure I can find out.
I mean, if that was, say, the planning commission to the select board, then I would think that it would probably be on a chapter by chapter basis, and I would think that the energy chapter information would be based on the goals of the energy chapter, possibly.
Yeah, but I like Chris's comment that it would make the public more aware and shine the spotlight on it, be picked up by the newspaper, and kind of have more resonance in the community. Because
I'm
we're
agreeing
not.
with him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because we're not very popular.
I'm just saying that if it was part of a whole report on the town plan, if that's what it was.
Well, then I would say outside of the town
Yeah.
plan,
Yes.
because
In addition,
it would be buried in the town
right,
plan.
as well as, I think this is one that's actually worth pulling out. I mean,
Yeah.
not leaving it out of the planning commission's report to whoever it's supposed to go to, but making sure that this gets its own announcement.
Well, so do you want to put that in here?
I agree with Chris also. Many people watch the select board meetings live at home that don't come, and it really is a great, it reaches out
Yep.
to a very great community and really
Yep.
informs people.
All right.
So we want to say report to the select board
Mhm.
annually. Okay.
I think it would help make this more of a living document, which
Yeah.
it's intended to be.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate it as a Brattleboro resident, knowing what's going on, what's next, what's up, what's changed, because, as I indicated the last time I commented on the energy draft chapter, I think it's important to acknowledge what a dynamic time it is that we're living in. Very volatile energy prices. Just to recite the obvious, the ongoing and escalating debate, ever more public, ever more high stakes level of debate on Vermont Yankees' future. energy prices, the growing use of various green types of technology. We've just had, since this chapter started being put together, we've had a sea change in the solar panel industry. You know, if it's not one thing, it's another that's happening with this particular subject. I think the public is increasingly aware of this, especially since back in was it 07 when we had gasoline go to $4.50 a gallon? Was it 07 or was it 08?
Summer of '08,
I think it was 07 because
It was 07.
I
Yeah.
suspect that was really what kicked the chocks out with the economy and got us rolling into this recession. It was the triggering event. And everybody is aware, acutely aware of these phenomena. And one of the really helpful things about having an energy committee and an energy coordinator and a planning commission is these are resources that help foster an understanding of the various elements of the issue and how they relate, and also where the handles are on the issue that people can grasp and do something about, because they need to. We want to talk about self-reliance. Well, that's where self-reliance comes in, and how we can foster that is pointing out all the ways that people can do things themselves for their own good, and in so doing for the public good, such as insulation, caulking, and all that other pretty pedestrian sort of activity that leads to enormous savings. I, as I'm speaking for myself, feel very, very pleased to know that these things are indeed possible. I just had a fellow doing a follow-up inspection, a follow-up test on my house today. You know, we made some progress over the last year, about 12%. There's more that can be done. My goal is 20% reduction in the draw of air through the house. And since 2008, in our house, we've reduced fuel oil consumption by 40%.
Wow.
Which I thought was pretty good for a house built in 1790. You know.
Yeah, big house too.
But it's possible, and I don't think that people would know this in general if there weren't this really wonderful start that we've had already. And we've had the terrific presentations on installing your own solar hot water heating. That was 2 years ago, I think. It was even 3 years ago. Every year. And publicizing Efficiency Vermont, which has a wonderful program, not just for light bulbs, but for really subsidizing the costs of doing some very simple, very effective things, low-tech things that a homeowner can do himself, and with a bunch of materials in a cardboard box, rather from the hardware store. So, hence my suggestion about A, bringing this to the select board, and B, perhaps including something in here about an observation as to what a dynamic time this is in the world of energy as it affects us over our own thresholds.
Okay.
So thank you very
All
much.
right.
Thank you.
Chris. Carolina?
I just, at the last meeting, on page 6, the chart there with the municipal buildings with the percentage of, from the year 2000 to 2010, the energy use.
Yep.
It was noted at the last meeting that the transportation center wasn't there, so in 2000, so the data wasn't included, but maybe there could be a line there just putting that, because it is a town building, and I imagine somebody's going to notice that omission, because it was
We did
noticed at the
actually-
last session. Because I have a note about that from my notes from that October meeting. And,
Yeah, we actually got data on that too. I think, yeah, I'm glad that you noticed that. 'Cause it must
and
have-
maybe it just has maybe there is.
No, I think it's sort of like didn't, I got it separately or something. Yeah, I'll add that back in.
Yeah, great, thanks.
And yeah.
So, in the BUHS thing there, is that the BTUs from CHIPS? Is that what's in there?
Yeah, and they also use oil as backup.
Oh,
And
okay.
I think maybe some propane
Yeah, so that's the total of everything.
and electricity.
And electricity. Okay, thank you. Anything else?
I have, under energy and transportation, we talked about, and I think it came up at the meeting with Kim Stevenson there, the sustainability meeting, under energy and transportation, just to advocate for support for more bicycles in town, and just, I don't know if that would go there, but it was brought up, the use of some mention about bicycles. It comes under complete streets in a way, but the
I
bike
think I
lanes, but just bicycle use is an energy efficient kind of, and carpooling, and somewhere here is about the park and ride lots. Is that here?
There's
That's
information
here.
in here about park and ride lots, and then under complete streets, there's information about bike and pedestrian suitability of this. So that's over on page 11.
I think we could refer them to the transportation chapter because we hit on those things pretty
Yeah.
big and
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, we do a lot.
We need to.
So
Yeah.
that's where,
Yeah.
so is there a statement there that can just refer it to there? I think you,
Yeah,
does
okay.
it say that somewhere? I thought it,
Yeah, over on page 11, there's explicit mention of park and ride and complete streets, but don't call out bicycles separate from that. So maybe that's what you want us to do. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
and or just like somewhere else it was referred to the other
Yeah.
the transportation chapter on page blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Because actually on page 12, it was in the land use chapter,
Yep.
C page, blah, blah, blah. I think just
Yep.
to reference the transportation,
Okay.
because that does come under energy use.
Okay.
My other question is, where does recycling, garbage, trash, recycling come in the town plan? Pay as you throw, no, not pay as you throw, but all those things.
Under the appendix called controversies.
Yes, I know.
Municipal facilities.
Municipal facilities.
And that chapter.
Yes. And you're right to bring this up. In an energy sense, there are two aspects
Yeah.
associated with solid waste. One is the more you can reduce it, the less energy you consume. And then with whatever you do have, utilizing that, recycling it or extracting whatever value you can from it, so that it doesn't become landfill. So there are discussions of energy that incorporate discussions of solid waste management, I guess. It doesn't happen in this chapter. But it does get addressed in the municipal facilities chapter.
Okay, I just want to be sure, because that's a very
Yeah.
important
Yep.
topic, including
Yeah, reduction as well as
reduction,
recycling.
especially to encourage the composting program, Project Cow, and because that will cut way down on street curbside trash pickup. And,
Right.
And if there's a separate program for that, then that would
Right.
save the town a lot of money when we're looking at budgets and
So
tightening
maybe we
budgets
can
and all that kind of
get
stuff.
something in here and then again refer people to the
Yeah, I
municipal.
think so, just a mention
Facility, yeah.
of overall,
Right.
because recycling and reuse, not just recycling, but
Right.
reuse, and
Right.
acknowledging Renew Salvage, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure what's going to happen with them,
Yeah, we might not do
but
that.
all of that, and again, I think I mentioned it here before, there's a very creative person in Massachusetts who started collecting years ago computers and plastic kind of stuff, and has created himself a multi-million-dollar business now of repurposing plastics that come out of the waste stream.
Right.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of
A lot of money in salvage.
that's right, a lot of money in salvage, and always has been. It got waylaid for a while in the 80s, but all that,
Okay.
even people taking repurposing soda cans or just
Right.
water jugs and soda
Right.
bottles can remake, and there's an industry waiting to be made, and, I mean, it happens in other places, but that would be a good kind of industry for here, a
Okay.
regional,
Yep.
again, getting stuff out of the landfill. And,
So a mention of that in the energy chapter and then reference
Yeah.
to the.
yeah,
municipal-
minor reference here,
I
but
should point out that solid waste facility really only functions as a transfer station.
Transfer.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but the more we reduce what goes there, the
They have
better.
swapping and.
Yeah, they have
They
other
do a
functions.
great
Yeah,
job.
they do. Yeah, they have
it
other.
increases all the
Yeah.
time.
Yep. Okay, great.
Anything else? Chris?
Thanks, I just wanted to dig more into the business of bicycles. Could you put something in there about the possibility of increasing the number of bike racks? Down Main Street a few years ago, there was an installation of these wonderful sculpture-like
Yeah.
bike racks. They were bright red. There was one in front of what's now the Key Bank, and there was one in front of the library. I don't know where the others are. But is the one in front of the Key Bank still even there? Wasn't it taken out?
Yes, the library has
Oh, it's
one.
put back. Yeah, okay. And the one in front of the library was painted black.
Bike racks are
Red
addressed explicitly in the transportation
Oh,
chapter.
super. Okay. Thank you.
Paul?
I was just wondering if there could be a mention of a way to go commuter challenge, either in the energy chapter or in the transportation chapter. The energy committee has been working with a group of large businesses in town to encourage alternate transportation.
We think it's in transportation already.
Okay, great.
We'll double check that then.
Well, we'll confirm.
I think it is.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this chapter. I feel like with each draft, it's getting stronger.
Yeah.
And I think it's very.
How many more are you planning on?
It's as strong as
You
it
can go to
can
10.
be.
This is, yeah, this is pretty strong.
But I just appreciate all the comments and all the work that's gone into it, and I think it is something that we can.
We appreciate all your work, Paul.
Thanks.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks,
It's
Bob.
great to leave early. Thank you.
Okay.
Any thoughts on land use, Paul, before you go?
Keep it compact.
He didn't read
it
that
reduces
chapter.
energy. Keep it compact, it reduces energy.
Right, smart growth.
Right.
Yeah.
Main Street's all that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Hoorah.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Sue and the planning office. Each time we go over all these, you take all and incorporate
Yep.
the feedback in between the two of you working that out. And I thank you for all that. It's been great.
Yeah, I like the new, Rada, I like the new format.
Yeah.
You do? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it worked way better.
Oh, it's great. I think this is it.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I
Right,
think
you'll
it's
see
it.
it in a
Yeah.
complete draft of the town plan.
Right. You might get
All right.
color pie charts. That'll be as far as we're going to
Yeah,
go.
you'll get some cleaned up stuff.
Maybe a nice picture of the cooling towers at BY or something. I don't know.
There you go, in the sunset,
All right.
glowing.
All right.
Well, nice job.
Yeah.
One-eyed fish.
So, on to land use. The one we've all been waiting for, really.
It's not complete yet.
It needs that version 5.75.
I know, I liked
Yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah,
I
really.
liked that. I'm gonna start doing version control on mine. Better.
So, Sue, would you like to take us through this a little bit?
I will try to.
Okay.
So we start off with the existing land use, and that's a description of kind of what is our land use pattern now. Don't know if in the past I've sent around a map. I should have sent that out with this, but we've coded it by residential uses, public facilities, commercial and industrial, and so you can kind of see the just general pattern of development. So downtown and the village are kind of our mixed-use centers, and then I go on to provide a description of the different areas of downtown, because there's the commercial core, there's the waterfront area, there's Wells Fountain, and they all have kind of different design characteristics and in some cases use characteristics. So these are obviously our historic densely settled areas. And then I talk about the different residential neighborhoods in Brattleboro, or the different residential land use patterns. So you've got those areas that are in and around the downtown that are more grid-like, traditional, mature neighborhoods. And then you have the more suburban-style subdivisions, which are the cul-de-sacs, or we've talked a lot about these neighborhoods. They only have one access in and one, the same one out. So those are kind of often off of Route 9 heading west. Some of them are off the other streets as well. And then we've got the really more rural type single lot development to the north and south of Route 9 and further out west. And then I talk about the commercial areas. So we've got the new rural commercial district, so that's just west of the West Brattleboro Village. We have Putney Road and the Canal Street areas are the newer, I guess, commercial areas once you're outside the downtown the village. And then our industrial, we have a couple of areas that service our industrial uses. There's the Industrial 1 exit, the Exit 1 Industrial Park. There's, what's the one with CNS? What's that? Old Ferry Road.
Oh, the other one.
Old Ferry Road. And then we have some more remnants of kind of the Continental Hill, some areas on Burr Street or in Cross Street are industrial as well, more mixed. And then I've begun talking about the future land use. So this is where we want to move, and the part that I've completed for the most part is what were kind of the issues that rose to the top that we're trying to address with our future land use plan. So there were 5 of them. Reducing the impact of flooding and erosion was really high up on the list. They haven't been ranked. I know that's something that we can do if we want to do that. Growing sustainably, responding to changing industrial uses, improving the quality of commercial areas. We had that municipal planning grant project, so that's pretty much that item. And then increasing public access to the waterfront, which we've spent some time talking about here, but there's been a lot of efforts on behalf of the town over the last couple of years, particularly with the downtown waterfront. So what I did is I took each topic and tried to make the case as to why it's important and why we're considering it, and it's shaping our future land use plan. And then for this chapter, I'm still trying to work out exactly how it's going to flow, but because it doesn't necessarily fit the template that we've used in the past with a goal and a policy and actions, because there's so many potentially proposed zoning changes that we want to recommend. So what I've done here is make recommendations under each of these topic areas, issues that we're trying to address. And then I envision the front page to be more of the smart growth, typical type goals with maybe an action that is something like amend the zoning ordinance to incorporate the recommendations of this chapter, just something more basic like that. So that's kind of the layout of it. If you want to make comments. I haven't gotten through all the recommendations, and if you've read the recommendations, you might notice that some of them are zoning changes and some of them are more non-regulatory implementation. So maybe we pull out the non-regulatory stuff and put that in the front part. But the next piece that will be coming will be, I'll keep working on this with our land use subcommittee, which has been very helpful, is to keep working on the recommendations, but then also produce the map that we'll have.
So
That's required.
related to this chapter, what maps will there be? There'll be the existing?
So there's going to be the existing land use, and then there's a future land use map.
And that's it? Okay.
Those are required.
Yeah.
They're required.
They're
I mean,
both required.
Okay.
the future land use might end up being on more than one map,
Uh-huh.
or there might be some little graphics that we can put into the text.
Little maps that show those areas of change that we've already seen? Could be
Could be,
additional?
yeah.
Is
Right, and we could,
that necessary to put in?
yeah, I think it's a good idea.
It's a good, yeah.
Useful?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, you could stretch it a little and then have, we could have images from somewhere else, or sort of generic images representing, what medium density mixed use development looks like, or what a new streetscape may look like under certain, once the future land uses come into place. So I wonder about doing that, whether it's worth it, but I think that sometimes people benefit from seeing in graphic form what the narrative
Pictures, yeah.
is described.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe an example.
I just looked down and on page 5, recommendation 6, under the addressing the flooding and reducing the impact of flooding and erosion, it mentions LID. I mean,
Yeah.
it's in a little graphic of.
There's not too many people apart from those in the room that are going to be able to picture
Yeah.
one of those things.
Yeah.
So, I made that last remark on the basis of having a look at Dan Burton's report, which is really graphically rich, and I think really conveys an enormous amount simply because of that.
So do you want me to walk through the recommendations, or if everybody's had a chance to?
I have one question.
Those are, oh, go ahead. I'm
Where,
sorry.
where did we stand with what happens with the land on Flat Street that was flooded? Mr. Sosimo and New England Youth Theater area, there's talk of buildings being torn down and being rebuilt. Can people rebuild there? That's okay?
It's in the flood, well, if you're talking about the corner of Elm and Flat Street, the building that's going to be torn down there is not a result of flooding, it's a result of contamination. So it would be torn down, and it's in the floodplain, so it could be rebuilt. It would have to be elevated, or flood-proofed if it's commercial.
Right.
And the proposal that came before the Development Review Board takes that into account. At this point, they're not proposing a building at the time.
And similarly for the Kiln Drive facility, there was some highly specific kind of flooding and damage to the structures at the rear of the property. They're actually, the newer ones at the front of the property are actually designed to withstand lateral pressure from floodwaters, and they have the openings for the garage doors and so forth designed in such a way as to allow water to flow through. So they actually do meet the code. So it's almost a sort of a parcel by parcel consideration.
Okay. But you have to build within the existing footprint?
No,
No. Okay.
not
Just
yet.
curious. No.
One thing I saw that I liked the idea of, but I didn't know if it made sense.
Thanks.
Well, the one, you named the downtown centers,
Yeah.
and calling the one Wells Fountain. I like the idea of that area because it is sort of a distinct area from High Street, over to the Commons. But I don't know if anybody would think of it as the Wells Fountain area, But maybe there is another way to say it, or,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, that was, well,
but I don't know what it is.
I agree. I'm not sure that people will necessarily think of that as Wells Fountain, but it's also a character area that we could promote. I mean, we talked earlier about that area and different uses
Yeah.
that were sympathetic
Around the
Yeah.
to the
commons.
architecture. I mean, there was that great publication, I think done, may have been in the 90s, by Winter and Associates, that was the design guidelines for
Right.
downtown that had promoted that
Yeah.
Wells, or
Right.
that's
Oh,
where the
what
Wells
they call
Fountain
it. Oh, okay.
came
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
So we're really just trying to promote the naming of the new neighborhood, the new name for the neighborhood.
No, I think it's a neat thing to call it out.
Yeah.
I just don't know, it seemed like maybe another name, but say,
Yeah.
have a contest,
Somebody was actually describing for us the other day how when the architects designed the courthouse, that they actually related the courthouse not just to the fountain right in front of it, but in fact the park at Malfunction Junction. Is that if you sort of see it
Both ends.
at both ends, you see it as
Oh, yeah.
repeating that, so it's almost capturing the extent of downtown.
Mm-hmm.
So
and they each have an intersection right in front of them. It's
that
Yes.
people have found to comment
Scary.
on while they're waiting to move. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe
a
we should
jolt
come
of
up-
excitement at either end of Main Street.
Maybe we could call this something else apart from Malfunction Junction, like. Okay.
Well-functioned junction.
No, it doesn't function very well at all. People prop there all the time.
It's better.
Should have been here before. It used to be awful, really.
Yeah, really, it is better, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, that was
Perfect for
not
So now you know where it
criticism,
is.
but more of a question if there
Right.
was another
Okay.
way to name that.
And it's interesting to me how in other communities, I guess more likely in the Midwest and the West, that the courthouse can have a much more significant kind of civic role, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, like yes, exactly. Like a county court, well, like the one in Newfane, it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Really is a significant part of the streetscape there, and it is another. So this one's a little.
Kind of divorced from.
Yeah, it's just a little isolated, and I
town.
think the range of functions that go on in there are also a little narrow. Yeah.
You sort of don't want to be there. You don't wanna wind
Arraignments
up
and
there.
things, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the body search to get in, yeah, it's a little, doesn't really encourage that much.
Even in New Hampshire, it's different. That's where the registry of deeds are.
Right.
You don't do everything at the local. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right,
Also, like candy with Mayberry business.
yeah.
So let's see if people on the commission would like to ask questions. Want to do it that way? And-
Sure.
Yeah. Anybody got a question, comments?
I just want to comment that I think from the meetings that the small group has had with all the different recommendations, you've captured a lot of what we've talked about in there. Up to date, and I think it's very comprehensive, and I think it all does lend itself. It's not, this isn't in the other format with goals and actions and whatnot, but I think it can translate pretty easily. At least I think so. Maybe I'm saying something that you've already decided is bigger than needs to be, but I think those 5 areas, really, those for future land use, I mean, that's really what we're looking at as goals, and then everything else comes under that. And it's probably liable to generate lots of comments, I'm sure, from the general Joe public. But I think it's very specific and lays out a lot of work to be done, and to really I think it's going to be a good guide for the future development of the town, to really lay a framework. And I'm sure it'll be a work in progress, because it'll always keep changing anyways, as like with the energy stuff. But mostly just good stuff, I have to say. I'm not going to, most of it we discussed at our meeting.
Okay. Liz, do you have-
I think this is very nice. And I also, I like in the beginning, because I think we've all said many times how important the land use section of the master plan is. I think is the most important section of the plan.
Yeah,
So
is it-
I think you've captured that in this introduction. I would say more explicitly on the end of that little introduction section that this will form the basis for future land zoning changes.
Yes.
Do they make that specific?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually think the introduction has room for expansion as well, but
But I thought...
it feels awfully short compared to the energy.
Yeah.
Oh, Dan with faint praise. So, yeah. Right.
Yeah. And then in the existing land use section, the sentences at the end of each of these two paragraphs are very important. Talking about the very little growth in every land use category, and saying also that there's a larger portion of the tax base now shared by residential taxpayers. Those are very important, and I think they need to be brought into the future land use discussion. Perhaps at the end of the future land use, there could be a conclusion. I'm assuming that you're going to have a chart with all of the recommendations, and there could be a conclusion right before that talks about how these initiatives that are being proposed will, their goal is to address the concerns that were identified in the existing land use. For example, those two sentences, that there's a larger part of the tax base now shared by residential taxpayers, and there's been very little growth in any major land use category, so that one of the goals of these zonings and all these changes is to try and spur development and direct development in the areas where it's most needed. I think that these little bullet points in the future land use section are a good ranking as they are. I don't know if you've given that any thought.
In order of importance.
Yes.
Yep.
Because I think flooding has become our number one issue.
Yeah, I also just don't think they need to be numbered. They're all important, but I agree with you, so not to butt in on you there.
No, and that's it. I think it's swell.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to continued iterations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kimberly?
I'm assuming the housing stuff is in the housing chapter. Doesn't need to be addressed
We're assuming
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
directly in the land
Do you
use.
mean residential land use or,
Yeah.
well, yes and no. I am struggling a little bit because, well, the next part will lay out the future land use map and there'll be a little description of the different areas. And so residential will be brought in that way. I get a little, I realize that the items that we're discussing or the issues that we're discussing don't directly deal with residential, except under, where you located and how it is done is kind of addressed in there.
I think that at some point, maybe in this chapter, even if we refer to the housing chapter, and I don't know if we're all in agreement, but I do think there is a need for housing, a certain type of housing, maybe. And even though the market will drive that, I think we should not rule it out by any means. We've had a lot of discussions about where, how much, what kind. And maybe even in one of these chapters, and maybe it's the housing chapter, we talk about the trends as they are, as they've been so far, and then where those trends are sort of going. Elderly housing, maybe how that the placement of the elderly housing in relationship to what their needs are in the town. Putting them on a hill could be a fun ride down.
Just put them on a toboggan and send them on their way.
Rocket
I'll make
power
them
back
walk
up.
up.
But I do think it's something to consider as far as, I don't know if we need to get that specific, but it's something to consider.
Yeah. I think part of the kind of difficulty that we've had addressing that to some extent is an expectation that either pretty dramatic renovation or scrape-offs are going to happen in the traditional grid laid-out neighborhoods if we are going to try and keep the compact form. So sort of block by block or street by street, we might actually see more transformation of existing neighborhoods. So but
I
it's
think-
difficult. It's really difficult to address that through land use.
I think in the sustainable growth, we could talk a little bit about housing in there and and refer to the housing chapter there and say where we would direct it.
I mean, I guess as far as, we had talked about North Brattleboro, that area just above on
Yep.
the plateau area being an opportunity for housing maybe.
Yep.
Sites like that lend itself to sort of conforming to that grid-like
Yes.
pattern rather than a high point where it's just, and I feel like that should be talked about somehow. And again, maybe that's in the housing chapter, but
To avoid curvilinear subdivision roads.
yeah, just
that's
sort of.
Well, we did talk about
Gentrified.
that as a way to improve the commercial areas, so I think it can also fall in there.
And another thing that we've kind of talked about it a little bit before, but avoiding the cul-de-sacs, but also making sure that new development, if it were to happen, is part of the rest of the grid. It seems silly to just keep
Yep.
Lollipop.
All those lollipops.
lollipops and just sort of saying, well, there's a bunch of bedrock here. We'll just make the parcel line do something stupid that has to. I mean, it's. I don't know. It's a little extra homework. Maybe we could inform smarter planning.
On page 5, where I haven't written about access standards, that include that there.
Oh.
A lot of people like, since you used cul-de-sacs instead of lollipops, I'm just thinking in real estate parlance, a lot of buyers in larger areas than geographically than Brattleboro like cul-de-sacs because their kids, it's a great kind of block party neighborhood. Kids can play. It's safer because it doesn't have through traffic. But as we've learned at the Complete Streets workshop, I mean, there's ways to create quieting streets in other ways. So we have techniques to highlight that in a different way.
Yeah, I mean I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves is, it's not even the cul-de-sac. It's where they just stop the street. They're like, well, we'll do it in phase 2, and it never happens. I mean, really, it
You
looks
just have to live
terrible.
long enough.
The best part is when they build a cul-de-sac, but it's not been designed properly, so it the circle hits the property line instead of like where it's, so you can't ever get it through. It's like they purposely do it.
That makes sense.
Or accidentally sell a parcel that was meant to be a right of way
That's right.
for a house. Just
Accidentally.
just for example, So just saying. I'm not sure it would never happen here.
Whose job is that, Brian's?
We've made it his responsibility from now on.
Yeah, I have a suggestion for what Timberly was talking about. If you wanted, well, on page 3, if you wanted to have the future land use kind of use the same structure as the existing land use, just in the beginning, and then you can get to the 5 or 6 special issues, then you could go to the future land use section, and right after that first paragraph, have sections that say residential, industrial, commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
and that's probably going to match up with the map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can go into your, there are
Yeah.
5 or 6 issues that we want to discuss.
Yeah.
And then it would match the structure and address what Timberly was talking about.
Yeah. Good.
Oh, and I also thought there should be somewhere where we mention all the planning studies that have been done, like Hawk and
Yeah.
everybody.
And then what came out of them as well?
Yes, I think a lot of the chart at the end, a lot of these recommendations are those recommendations just in a new
Yeah, the
format.
recommendations have come
Hawk,
from somewhere.
somewhere,
Well, or
yeah.
any of the waterfront
That's right.
studies,
Yeah.
or
The waterfront ones,
ARP,
you
or the
itemize
downtown
and
design
explain the
guidelines.
waterfront ones, but there's been others, and then there's like the Saratoga report for Canal Street. I mean, there's been lots.
Just to make sure that everyone knows how much work has gone into this at a minimum.
Right. So actually, you're right, because to produce this chapter has required us refamiliarizing ourselves with just about everyone.
With everything that's been done,
Yeah.
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 And at some point, it's been based on West Brattleboro and the Saratoga and the Putney
So
Road and all
iterative.
that.
And done and redone, but a lot of work. Yeah.
Is there something in here that, maybe this is in the transportation chapter, is there something in here that talks about all the different trails that are existing now, the West River Trail and connectivity?
Natural
That is in the
resources.
natural resources. Well, it depends. So it depends on the type of trail.
It is mentioned
Some is in
somewhere,
the
I
wet.
can't
Some is in the
remember.
natural resources. Some,
It's
if it's
great.
more town, like the Living Memorial Park trails, will be mentioned in municipal
Municipal,
facilities.
right.
But most of our trails in town are not town-owned, so it's in natural resources.
And they're all most exclusively regarded as recreational facilities, if you like, or recreational, that their primary function is as recreational rather than as transit oriented, if for want of a better term. And
Oh, like ski jump hill, there's
yeah,
trails all over.
and that's
Neighborhoods.
okay. I mean, I think it's plausible that if the Whetstone Pathway was built out to West Brattleboro, people would start using it as a kind of a transit route.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is possible too. We had talked in the small group about whether we wanted to indicate some of those future connections that we want to have. So in the waterfront area, we do talk about, and it does talk about the West River Trail, so creating that sort of connection from West River Trail across the railroad bridge over to New Hampshire. We could do that on the map since we have called out the waterfront.
Yeah,
so we can go.
even for the sake of knowing, I feel like I don't know where they all stop and end. I mean, it's
We're going to
like
fix that. There's going
Yes,
to be a
there's gonna
nice
be a
map
map.
that the Conservation
big
Commission's
maps.
trying to produce a brochure.
Yes.
Will that be in the master plan?
Well, I thought I should. I thought about that today, and I said I should add it because it's a project underway, so it'll be.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've been working on this for a long time.
It might be in the natural resources. It was just
Yeah.
done so long ago, I can't remember.
Great.
Yep.
I mean, one of the neat things about Brattleboro is you can live in town, but you have access to a lot of trails to
Yeah,
walk
it's
on
actually-
without having to really get in your car.
It's
Or-
such a unique attribute that it's sort of astounding. You have to be here a long time before you realize it, and
I
I
know.
think that it's one of the things that will turn up even in the economic development chapter and other places, because it's a way where people get to reconsider what kind of a community Brattleboro is. So it's seen as a sort of a jumping off point for outdoor recreation communities somewhere else. Like this is where you gas up and eat or come in when the weather is lousy
Yep.
from somewhere else, like Grafton or Mount Snow or whatever it is. But in fact, it could be its own destination of a certain kind very easily.
Somebody who comes to town on
Good
the
point.
train,
Yep.
say for instance,
Yeah,
a
sure.
grad student who stays
Yep.
at the Latches can walk across the bridge and hike Mount Metasticus, or even then hike the retreat trails,
Yep.
all within walking
No, it's a really big, it's quite unique. So it's a real big feature.
So is there somewhere in all of the work that has gone into this and maybe it's economic development. I mean, I feel like there needs to be something that denotes a sense of entry and the importance of a sense of entry into Brattleboro from New
It's in here.
Hampshire. Signage, is that maybe
It's in
we talked
It's
about
in here.
here?
Yeah, gateways.
Gateway's pulled out.
Yep, coordinated signage, I forget what.
And that's been and that was a core finding of the Hawk report.
And also the
And Sar-
Babs.
Babs
Saratoga.
Market Study and
Yes.
Saratoga Associates. Probably a few others.
What's BAB doing with that?
They're working on a coordinated sign project with the town and Matt Mann from Wyndham Regional, wayfinding signs.
Yeah, she has a grant, doesn't she?
Yeah, so there'll be a consistent sign package deployed for each of the 3 exits, and that you'll be able to then follow similar signs all the way to downtown.
Wasn't that like a year ago, a year and a half ago?
That takes a long time.
Takes a while.
And then a matching Google map to go with it, so that you could, so that the signs and the destinations would turn up on a Google map as an app on your phone.
Yeah.
But that's actually harder to do than you realize if none of the parking lots, for instance, have 911 addresses. So it's no way we can fix them geographically, which is what you need to do.
Parking lots have a 911 address?
They don't. That's
They
the problem.
don't.
They don't.
They should.
Sure, they
have
need
one.
to,
Yes.
though. Yeah, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fortunately, all the dispatchers all know every one of the parking lots around here, and most of the emergency personnel do, so
Yeah.
every now and then you'll hear one that goes, no, where was that again?
So it's just one of those issues that you start a project like this and then you hit something like that, and that will take a while to just resolve.
I just had a couple things. One was just even mentioning the shoreland regs somewhere in the
Oh, okay.
waterfront
waterfront.
stuff.
Yeah.
I think most people aren't even aware of that, or, it sort of isn't known. A question about, well, I think any place where we talk about minimum lot sizes, it can be really confusing, is my, why smaller and bigger do different things, and maybe just a little tutorial in that would be good. I think you do a nice job in the 3, I guess there's 2 or 3 paragraphs that have that, but it would probably be hard for somebody who has no familiarity with it to get the gist of it, I think, so.
Maybe a text box or something.
Yeah, something about, on the one hand residential, on the other hand commercial, and what lot sizes can do and that sort of thing, Because I think that would be a really great, if people had a grasp of that, I think it would be a really great contribution to
Yeah.
town life,
Not just this town.
This town, but
To
the level of discourse would go,
shoot
up.
upwards.
And then the other one was just a question on page 4, cumulative substantial damage, and under recommendations,
What does that mean?